Yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's talk on a day in the life. This is a session that Greg and I and Sheila were hoping to maybe take a little bit of a different tack in terms of showing you some of the Ravenblack business benefits. We want to do this through the lens of, the people who are responsible for delivering on content servers, return on investment, its value, delivering on things that the organization is asking for. So our session is a day in the life and how Ravenblack improves your content ownership experience. And hopefully we'll show you exactly what that looks like through the eye or through the lens of a content server developer, administrator, business manager, anyone who's getting their hands dirty with trying to tailor content server to their organization. So just to give a very quick introduction, many of you already know us, but at Ravenblack, I guess just to quickly summarize our purpose, we are just focusing and really investing in boutique products for, like I said, the people who are trying to make content server successful in their organization. Greg and I and Sheila, we all have had experience with OpenText in the past. And before that, Greg and I were with a company called Resonate KT. And this is going back, that started, over 20 years ago. Greg developed the first version of web reports, and we've been with that product for many years over the ways. But we feel uniquely positioned to be able to talk about this today because not only are we content server developers and administrators ourselves, we've worked with over hundreds of customers over the 20 plus years, really delivering very unique, tricky, and sometimes very complex requirements for content server. And we've been able to help every customer, regardless of how tricky those requirements are, deliver on what they needed to deliver. So that's the very quick 10,000 foot introduction to us because we want to get right into this. Just to set some context of why we're showing you what we're going to show you today. Like I said, we at Ravenblack focus on developing boutique tools for content server tailoring for all the unique tasks and all the common tasks, day-to-day tasks that people like developers and administrators are responsible for content server. And along the way, we have consistently, time over time, seen the challenges that organizations have, every organization has with content server. So leveraging our experience and building the tools that we're building and really focusing on that layer of content server ownership, what we provide at Ravenblack is, first of all, a reduced cost of development and support. And this is kind of one of our flagship benefits because, like I said, our forte, our experience is in development, tailoring, solving problems. And for us, it's always how do we build the tools and the techniques to be able to do this as quickly as possible and building for the long term in terms of, how we support the things that we build, how we maintain them, and not creating a huge amount of problems in the future with things like tech debt. Second, we reduce ramp up time for new developers, and we know the entry for development into content server can be daunting and sometimes intimidating. There's a lot of different methods and techniques and languages and you name it, different ways that you could develop. We really focus on that developer experience and making it easy for new developers to get right into working within content server and making it their own. Third, just like with when we were creating web reports, our focus and kind of one of our key values has always been on application robustness, security, and performance. We firmly believe that anything that you build needs to be built for the long term and it cannot compromise things like data integrity or security. So this is just a part of our DNA personally, and this is what we build into all of our products is thinking about building for robustness, ease of upgrades, making sure data is intact, permissions are intact, and all those good things. Fourth, reduce knowledge loss caused by personnel changes. This one is tricky, and anyone who's watching this may feel a very burning sting hearing this, because it happens when people build things or when people make changes or configure any system, especially content server. Personnel move on. They take new jobs, they leave the organization or maybe leave the department, and sometimes knowledge transfer doesn't happen or wasn't there in the beginning. So we wanted to solve that one in a very unique way, which we'll show you today. Improved adoption through modern development environments. This is something we've always been on the forefront of, is being able to leverage and introduce new web technologies into content server, and how you can leverage all these new libraries. We've taken that one step further. So not only do we help with providing an experience that is modern, that has all the development tools that you would expect in any development environment, we also make it really easy to build the applications and solutions using modern web technologies as well. This goes a long way. It's a simple thing to do, but it means a lot to the end users when they are working in a modern environment themselves. Second last, increased development and support access for cloud installations. We know a lot of organizations are migrating to the cloud or in the middle of that process and so on. And we know there's a lot of challenges with cloud deployments. It's not the same story as it is with an on-premise content server environment. So how do you build solutions in that environment? How do you tailor the system? How do you maintain it in the long term? We are focused very much so on that requirement as well. And finally, reduced software upgrade time. We know upgrades take a lot of time beforehand, and afterwards there's a lot of planning, and there's always gotchas and surprises when the upgrades happen. So through the tools that we built and leveraging a lot of experience working with customers through huge and massive upgrades, we are building into our tools, and we have built into our tools just simple things that are going to help with any kind of upgrade, figuring out and reducing the risk of those gotchas ahead of time, and when those surprises happen, solving them as quickly as possible. So that is the 5-minute overview of Ravenblack, which is tricky to do, but we've done it. So for the session, we're going to take you into the life of someone who is responsible for all of these things. So the people who are in content server every day and have to balance those requirements coming from the organization, balance the pressures of making sure everything is operational, efficient, working well, and taking all the needs of the users as they're coming in, working through and triaging those requirements and those needs, and then building those. It's not an easy task. So to try to make this story as real as possible, what we've tried to do is create the scenario where this is somebody who has a lot of content server experience. We are the person who has content server development experience. We've worked with content server instances in the past, built customizations and solutions, but now we find ourselves in a new organization. And this organization has a very mature, well-established content server system, lots of moving pieces, lots of things working on their own and automated, but we had nothing to do with actually implementing those or building those. So that's kind of where we start our story today. Now, at this point in time, what we're going to move into is we have just been tasked with going into this content server system that we're starting to get, a bit of a handle on how it works and what's been built. But we've been tasked with looking at an existing application that's already in production that many users are reliant on or using every day, and we can't just shut it down or rewrite it or anything, but we need to add in some new functionality. So a very, very common scenario that happens quite a lot. So what I'm going to do now, let's jump right into content server. So here we are, we're looking at content server. A lot of different people being in this situation, being tasked with this, it could be pretty daunting. Where do you start? So the first thing I'm going to show you is as this person who is, fairly new to this environment, but has a lot of development experience with content server, a lot of administration experience, um, we are going to go straight into the Ravenblack application analyzer. And this is the place to start. And I'll tell you why. What we have done is we've specifically designed the application analyzer as the starting point for anything investigative, for a starting point for troubleshooting quirks and issues and things that are just not going right in content server. It's also the starting point and jumping in point for any kind of development or anything that we need to change to the system. We want this to be the place to start. So I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to this area, to this product through this page, and then we'll continue on with the kind of the story. So the way we've developed the application analyzer, on the left we have what we call an aspect panel. So an aspect is really the relationships between objects. We are calling them aspects. And quite typically, those relationships are very much hierarchy based. You go into a folder, you see the items in the folder. But we know with any system, and with content server in particular, there's a lot of different types of relationships between objects that are not, most of them aren't actually hierarchy based. A lot of them are based on ties with metadata, ties around users, ties around parts of the business process. So we make it easy to find objects in context of any type of relationship where your objects are grouped together. We call those aspects, and the aspect panel is where we can see at a high level those relationships. So to dive into that, we have an aspect finder. So again, we are leveraging many years of experience in working with hundreds of customers to know what are the common relationships that we start with whenever we're doing any kind of investigation or any kind of development. So the way we've introduced this aspect menu, there's kind of two main sections here. The first one is search, and we've made very powerful search. A lot of it is very focused on kind of the methodology when you're trying to find items within a content server application or finding a bit of code. But we've created very powerful searches to be able to search the entire content server system, search for objects by things like data ID, username, web report objects by text and feature, users and groups, and so on. So maybe some of these searches are not earth-shatteringly new, but the thing with the application analyzer is we wanted to bring as many of these tasks into one place so you don't have to leave here to do a lot of the different things that you would need to do as part of any kind of investigation or development. So these searches are very powerful and they can be extended. Further down in the aspect menu, we've already predefined a whole bunch of different types of relationships that are going to be valuable to anybody who's managing a content server system. So we have our standard system browse and being able to easily navigate through our content server system very quickly and easily without having to wait for page refreshes and all that stuff. But in addition to things like my recent items, workspace objects, different types of relationships related to content server applications, we're going to go straight into the CS applications volume. So any kind of application that was developed using CS apps is going to be here. So this is a great place for us to start because we know that our users are already using an existing application, and chances are that it's here. So the application in particular we are looking to change is a issue tracking application that has been built specifically by the organization for helping their teams manage different types of their internal tickets. A lot of these could be bug requests or feature requests, but nobody requests bugs. Bugs, feature requests, and so on. So as we look through the content server apps volume, lo and behold, we have a application installed in the system called RB issue tracking. So when we just click on this, we get a very quick preview of this application. So kind of moving over this wider area, this is the inspection panel. So the inspection panel is going to be your best friend for basically getting that quick view of a lot of detailed information about whatever you're looking at in the aspect panel. So just by a single click on our issue tracking application, we have the ability to see high level all of the different contextual information about this application. So the way content server applications are built, there's a manifest file. There's usually many objects that are related in a lot of different ways through objects requiring other objects, web reports and sub-web reports, data sources, forms, and so on. So this gives us a high-level overview of the application as a whole. Now, the inspection panel itself is dynamic and totally contextualized based on anything like the type of object that we're looking at from the aspect panel. So just to quickly show you, if we go back to a system browse and go to the enterprise workspace, if we were to click on a folder, for example, we're seeing different windows in here. We're seeing high level, any type of comments and descriptions that have been entered, system information, so your node ID, node type, all the information about being created, updated, and so on. We can quickly see permissions and access lists, quickly see all the different audit events. A lot of this stuff is hidden or found in function menu pages. We've brought them all into one view. And again, so far we haven't had to leave this application. So jumping back, we have this application. We need to add in some new functionality. So I showed you what just a single click on the application does. This is kind of our high-level overview. Next, we have a concept called mounting. So we're using this kind of inspection paradigm to confirm and actually, is this the object we're looking for? Yes, it is. Now we're going to mount it. So mounting takes the whole context of this application analyzer and it focuses in on, in this case, the application. And that application, again, represents a huge amount of different types of relationships between different objects that make up this application. So when we mount the application, or we can mount a folder or different other types of things like a business workspace and so on, this is where we get to see the whole makeup and all the information and all the content related to this application. So in this application, we can see there are lots of folders, lots of web reports, and lots of different things that make up this application. So we've talked about the aspect panel, the aspect menu, the inspection panel, and so on. The other thing I just want to point out is so not only are all the different windows and different boxes of information here contextualized and dynamic based on the object, so are these tabs. So as we click on different objects, the tabs up here in the inspection panel represent kind of that next level of interaction with these objects. So where the inspection panel as a whole is giving you that high-level overview of all the relevant information about the object, these tabs will start based on the object type, will give you that next level. So for example, for a web report, we can look at the content of the web report. We can even run it and get a preview of it. For folders, these tabs changed. There's a documentation tab, which we'll show you in a second. So as you're working through these objects, you have your high level information, you have your next level of diving into the details and working with some of these objects. And then the final part of the application analyzer that I want to point out is this little hamburger menu. And again, it's completely contextualized and dynamic based on the object type. So here this is kind of our first, or not our first, this is the place where we want to start creating new content, making changes to content, and so on. So in this case, for like a folder, we have the ability to do a lot of the standard object actions such as move, copy, delete. We can create new folders here. We can create new web reports. And there's a few other options. So when we look at a web report, for example, this hamburger menu is going to change slightly. Um, so through all of this, like I said, one of the main goals for this was for the person who is working in Content Server to look for and make changes. We want to pull as much of that information and the actions that you need to do into one place. And that's kind of one of our design goals. So there's some other things here. So the ability to quickly take one of these objects, and move it into a different tab to run it, go into classic Content Server UI whenever we need to, or if it's desirable to do so. But in most cases, you won't have to leave this UI. So the last thing I'll show you for our application is we're looking at this kind of standard hierarchy view. And it's also worth noting that when we're looking at things in the inspection panel, even though the paradigm is kind of like a hierarchy, it doesn't necessarily mean these objects will always be objects within a set of folders. Sometimes the relationships will be shown based on other things, different linkages like data source types or web reports running a sub-web report. So a different way that we can look at this application is moving into more of a graph, kind of like a graphical view of it. So here we see it's the exact same application, but what we can do here is we can explore and move down each of the different levels of the relationships. So we can see the different containers, we can see the objects within them. From here, we can quickly inspect any of these objects and get that same inspection panel down below, just as we did in the other UI. And then we can also kind of set the context and mount one of these objects. If we're just going to be working in one of these subsections of the application, in this case, we can mount just that section. But one thing I'll say is the way that we build through this. So let me see. As we start to expand and work through the different layers and the different levels of this application and the relationships, this view, if there's different linkages that are not, so for example, if one object is making a kind of like a client request to another, we can show that relationship. We can also show relationships between web reports calling other web reports and so on. So looking at time and moving back on track. So step one is we found the application that we need to work in, and we have our requirements, and we've gone through and taken a high level look at the application analyzer. So from here, we're going to move on to step two, which is the actual getting our hands dirty and implementing this feature. So here, I'm going to pass over to Greg. And Greg, you will take us through step two.
Thanks, Darren. One thing that might not be visible through the demo is the concept of mounting in here is either you can double click an object, which Darren I think was doing, or anywhere in this application you see these little thumbtacks or drawing pins that some people might call them. You can also mount an object. And you'll notice within the inspection panel, wherever we have object references, you can either mount it to inspect that object, or in fact, everywhere you see these open and tab icons, you can open something in Content Server. And this is very tightly integrated with Content Server so that anything you want to do outside of our tool, you can get to very quickly and easily too. One of the things I'll start with as well is when Darren was talking about the different relationships, one of the keys here when you're trying to figure out how an application like this works is if you have a web report, and I'm going to mount one here, it actually shows all of the relationships between the web reports, so all of the sub-web reports, any interconnections, and as Darren showed, you can again view this in this hierarchical way, where it'll show you which things are sub-web reports and which things were HTTP calls. So tracing through all of the web reports in an application is extremely easy. This is the sort of thing that can take hours to plot out if you're trying to do it manually. With that said, I'm going to give you a glimpse of the application in question. And I just want to explain that you'll notice this application looks a lot like the application analyzer. So we use a framework, a basic framework to build applications, whether business or tools. So the application analyzer is built with this framework. And in this case, we're showing you a tool we actually built as a prototype so that we can show you this example for debugging. So if you imagine that you have users, they're using this application and they have either an issue or a requirement to enhance it. So in this example, let's say a user has come to us and asked us to expand for these tickets. We have a list of status values, and they actually want a new status value added to this list, let's say something called canceled. So all we really know at this point, if we're brand new, is they've shown us the tool. We can look at it. We see a couple of places where this status list appears. And we have a few options here. So if you didn't actually even know or couldn't find this as an application, one thing you could do is if you just know the ID of this, from the application analyzer point of view, one of the various searches Darren showed, here you can input a user ID, a data ID, a nickname, or for that matter, even a username, and it will find that object and mount it for you. As I showed earlier, if I then mounted this web report, I now have a full breakdown of all of the items in that application, all of the software items anyway. Additionally, and I'm just going to show you too, these tabs can all be closed up and you can open them as you need. You get a lot of context once you've found these in terms of what folder this lives in, the top of this particular set of objects. So you can go and look at them from a folder point of view. You can also see a lot of the information about this web report, including which application actually owns it. So you can get to the application even if you couldn't initially find it or you weren't sure, or if it isn't made as a CS app, you can get to it quite easily. Couple of ways of finding, so we're looking for some way of changing the status values. One way here is once we've mounted an application or anything in this aspect panel, you can actually filter on it. So sometimes simply using, checking out different words that might be in the title of the object will find you quite a lot of things. In this case, we can see some status related things, including a form and a template and a web report called Get Status Values. A third way you could find this, and then I'll stop throwing options up, is we have the idea that you can look for, search the whole system for a word like status, which might be a bit overwhelming. But for web reports, you can actually look at them in the context. So if you know that you have an app called issue tracking, you can search only for those objects in that app. Some of these are normal search things to do, but we've cut it down and refined it and simplified it to the specific things that an administrator or a developer would want to do. And here again, we have this web report called Get Status Values. So I'm going to focus in on looking at this. Besides the fact we can see things like, does it have a data source? Does it have a destination? What constants, if any, are being used? What parameters? We can now look at the content. And a little bit on, I'm going to go into some detail about using, this is actually a full-blown editor with a lot of advanced features that you won't find in existing web reports. In this case, we're still investigating. And we see that the status values are being built using the data source. And right off the bat, we have a hotkey feature where you can actually control double click on tags. In this case, it's showing us the data source object. And in fact, if we wanted, we could change it. Further to that, we can mount it. And now we're looking at the form that is being used as a data source. And from here, we see again, you'll notice that in context, this is a form, so there's a new tab here. We can see the template. We could mount that and look at that if we want. You'll also see a lot of these tabs have little expansions, and they typically have different functions. For example, for audit, you can actually filter on audit events. For forms, when you click on this, you can actually see the values that the form references. So in this case, we have the 5 items with 5 sequence numbers. And so we get the sense that to add this new value of canceled, we'll have to put it into this form. With any objects here, despite all the things, the functionality we provide, often it's useful to be able to just get into Content Server. So we always provide a curated list of important functions. This doesn't necessarily correspond with the normal function menu. So in this case here, we can actually edit that form in Content Server, and I'll just add this new value called canceled. Having done that, if I look at the data for this form, you'll see that canceled now appears in that data. And I can step back to the web report. Now, the useful part of this, besides being able to look at and edit the content, we have this thing called run output. You can run a web report normally if you want to. It'll open up in a tab and run it exactly as it would look in Content Server. But there's some benefits to this particular run output, in that it'll prompt you for any parameters required without you having to go in and look them up. In this case, it's provided a JSON response. It also includes the ability to format different responses. So in this case here, it's validated this JSON, and it's actually displayed it. So we can see this particular output, including the fact that we have a value called canceled. If we go back to our tool and refresh it to see if we've actually done what the user needed us to do, we have find issues by status. Canceled is now on the list of status values. I think the other one was if we had an issue selected, there was an option called update, which also. Now, obviously, there's a few things, other things behind the scenes here, but it's all very easy to trace and to find and to edit and to test. And all of the links, all of the objects that relate to each piece of functionality are linked together in a way that you can look at them and you can step back and forward through that. The next thing I'm going to do is simply to create a new web report. So another requirement we've been given in our fictional day in the life is that the user wants the issues displayed by this issue tracking tool to be visible in a widget in SmartView. So after I've droned, we'll see if that's easy or not. So as I said before, a lot of Content Server options are available through here, but we've added into our own internal menu here a lot of useful things, or things that you would commonly have to do, particularly as a developer. So adding a folder, for example, and maybe you want a folder called widgets. It's, as we'll find out a bit later, it's important. We've made it relatively easy in all places, and we encourage the use of comments. And that's because we can automatically build documentation with this tool. I'm not going to do anything too laborious here, but you'll also see, so if I select the widgets folder here, adding descriptions or comments, anytime you're in our tool, you can go in and edit and create these things. And it's all compiled later if you need to document your application to make it easier for other people to find out what's going on. So within this widgets folder, I'm going to create a new widget. A new web report widget. This one I'll just call get results. We have a system for specialized defaults. So if there's a default you really want to use, it'll come up first. In this case, I've added one called widget blank. Not exactly what we would use in our development, but it's helpful to this example. And we can go directly into the content for this widget. So it has a few basics of creating a table within a widget. I'm just going to paste a couple of things to make this in terms of some of the column numbers. What you can do, again, just to illustrate the way that this linkage works, in this case, we're going to add a data source for this get results. Again, I'm going to use this hot link capability because it's very handy and I can browse for. In this case, it's quite handy, as the luck would have it, called a live report called get tickets. I save that. That is now linked up to this web report. If you, obviously, you might have to create that yourself. I also want to show when you have a data source, again, it's mountable. So you could go in and look at this live report because we might want to know a little bit about it. You'll see the actual SQL is here. So these are all the column names I might want to use in here. For that matter, you can also edit the source. And if needs be, you can edit it in the normal everyday interface or go into those things. So I can see here a number of useful columns that I might want to know about as I'm working my web report. Could maybe paste those in for reference till I'm done. In here, I want to show a little bit of how fast you can develop in here. So for example, we might realize that we actually want to put in a filter in here over and above what's in the live report. We have a system of shortcuts, and for example, things like constants, you can just type in a $sign and a name. Parameters, you start to type in the parameter symbol, and now you have a bunch of parameters available. So there's a lot of very quick shortcuts. And for the actual tags themselves, anything that would start LL web report, you start with a square bracket and a W, and now you have access to all of those tags and you can quickly jump in. In this case, I want to compare a column called CS user ID. I type in an equals sign and now I have my column reference. And I'll type in CS user ID over top of that. And we want to, I won't get into the logic too deeply, but there's also a parameter called, so I have a component already that's going to launch this, which I won't get into, but it has a parameter called only my tickets. So if somebody just wants to see their own issues, they can select an option and this will deal with that option. Or CS user ID equals, and we just pop in the user ID tag. So again, not getting into the logic specifically, other than this works with the launcher, which we're not going to build today. This is somewhat how you can build things in here. Another example, if you're building an if-else thing, you can very quickly go in here, add all of the tags you need and subtags. So just to give a couple of examples, so we'll go through some of the actions of actually building this. I have one I prepared earlier, of course, but if we know we have a column called ticket title, again, we just have to put in the specific ticket title, which I thought I'd copied. Oh yeah. You get all of these local things as well. If we have something like ticket priority, happens to be listed here. We want to do a decode. There's our decode subtag, so we might have one, critical, etc. I won't build all of these, but yeah, creating these is quite quick and easy. I'm going to add this, and one of the things we can do with this is a draft save, which is unique. And it allows us to save something. It doesn't actually affect the executing web report if it's live, but we can do it quite quickly and without having to create another version. And then we can go back and delete them if needs be. This also allows us, if we have a diff tool that's built in here, where you can go back and forward to different versions. In this case, you'll see that from the original template, we've added in a bunch of fields and made some changes. Throughout this tool, this particular diff functionality is available. We have some of the usual things in terms of different ways of looking at syntax, and the various auto-completers built in can be turned on or off quite quickly and easily. So I'm going to leave this as is. As I say, something I created earlier. So now let's actually look at what we would be doing if we wanted to wire this into the actual perspective. So we have an existing perspective, and anytime you select an object in our analyzer, if it has an override, again, I'll close these all up, you'll see there's something called object overrides that appears if an active view or a perspective is in play. In this case, I can actually look at this perspective, and I can see from our tool that there are a couple of widgets being used. And again, for those, I can mount them, I can edit them, I can do whatever. If you select a perspective, whether it's an active view or a new perspective, it makes it also quite easy to get into the actual perspective manager from here. So we can jump in there and look, and we see here, this has got two web reports configured in it, which is exactly what we're seeing in the analyzer, except we can easily get into those web reports, and we can look at any parameters, so information about the widget itself. And the parameters also show up here. We can see which ones are used in the web report or which ones came from the perspective. Another thing we can do here, if we want to see how things are working, if we connected up our new get responses web report, we can, we've put this perspective on this issue tracking folder. So if we want, we can open this in Smart View. And I want to talk briefly through this because this is another product that we provide. It's called Dynamic Widgets, and we're just in the process of releasing it. The widget itself is just using built-in Smart View Alpaca form fields. That's nothing to do with us per se. But the idea is you can have widgets and you can then open up, size, or change other widgets. So we've created something here where the output of this is immediately opened in a large view. We allow different kinds of controls to be included that can allow you to dynamically do whatever you want. You can build an application. In this case, we've let this one size down to half, where we could rerun it. We could change some of these parameters. For example, if we clear this one, just show my results, we can maximize that, minimize it, and so on. And to expand on this, our tool would also allow you could hyperlink these and pop up or reveal yet another widget to show the content, maximize it, change the source. I won't go into it much more than that, but there's quite a lot of functionality. So I took the liberty of this is the results web report we were working on. It's created and linked to this launcher, so just through a constant. And then we have this built-in functionality that allows us to create an application that does all kinds of weird and wonderful things with the widgets that you can see. And at this point, I'm going to pass back to Darren.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. So we are implemented. We are now moving into kind of like part 3 of this journey. So part 2, as Greg just took you through, is implementing these new requirements. So a new status and a new way of looking at those issues within a perspective. So now we are developed. We are kind of, more or less code complete, but we haven't launched it yet. So before we ship this to production, we want to move into part 3, stage 3, which is testing the application, testing the features, and making sure that it's ready to be released. So there's a couple things here. So first of all, as Greg mentioned, documentation is something that's really easy to do with the application analyzer. So going back to our application, the changes have been made. They are all in this application. In fact, what we can do is when we're inspecting the app, we can even see things that have changed in the application since it was installed. So you can see here the work that Greg had been implementing and the objects that he'd been working in. There's different versions. So immediately we know that from the time that the application was installed to where we are now, changes have been made, and this gives us a really great summary of what changes have been made. Conversely, if we were trying to troubleshoot issues in an application, this is a great place to start because this will show you where somebody has been making changes in some of the application objects. So our application has been updated. It has new features in there. Now the documentation tab, as I alluded to at the beginning, whoever created this first application version didn't really leave us with any documentation. So what we can do here is we can create our own documentation automatically. And this is where the descriptions and the objects is very useful and very handy. So just by clicking the documentation tab, it gives us a summary of our application. So it tells us all the objects that are in there. It will absorb and take in all the descriptions for each of the different objects and load them in here. So you can see for each of these web reports, the descriptions in the object themselves make up our documentation. We also have the ability to see how the application, so we've taken a snapshot of the entire application's relationships and the hierarchy of relationships. So without really having to do anything, we now have a basis for our documentation. We can go through the objects and add more details in the descriptions, but we can also take this and add in further notes, and now we have documentation, which is fantastic. So this will not only help future people coming in looking at the app, but also once we move on to other tasks and completely forget about what we've done today, we can come back and quickly see what we've done and the changes that have been made.
Should add too, Darren, that this the way you ran this, it's showing both hierarchically based on folder containers and so on, but also it's created the web report software tree as well in here, so you can look at it from either point of view. Where things are stored versus where things are, how things are connected together.
Yes, and also just as you were mentioning the other day as well, so like in this example, we're showing the documentation generator as kind of like a step before releasing the application into production. But like you mentioned, this is actually a very valuable tool for investigation and troubleshooting things because we could have easily started with this application by running the documentation generator to get a full, kind of spit out of what the application looks like. And that could have been something else. As Greg said, a lot of people start mapping out and making notes. This is a great shortcut to that by having it generate notes for you as you start your investigation. Okay, so we've created the changes, we've created documentation. We think everything is working as it should, but we want to build a huge amount of confidence into the people who are developing and doing the administration of these applications. So one of the ways we can build confidence is by actually inspecting the application and letting you know as the developer if there's any issues. So we have the ability to run an audit report. So again, looking at our application, when we just use the audit report tab, this gives us a very quick summary of issues that it has found. So there's a lot of common gotchas and issues with application development where, hard-coded IDs are used for linking things together, or certain definitions, just, maybe there's constants that have been defined or are being called but haven't been defined and vice versa. We've seen a lot of different things over the years where applications that are working and have been built are fine, but then when you go to upgrade them or port them over to another system, it breaks. So the audit report is going to give you that quick shortcut to make sure that your application is as clean and as tight as possible. So this gives you kind of the very quick high-level overview. For each of these issues, it's very easy to, so no definition was found for this constant login URL. These issues are hyperlinked. You can go straight into, with one click, into the applications for this web report, the category or the constants page, and fix those definitions. We also have the ability to run more detailed audits. So, for example, here, let's run the web report reference audit. This will give us a table view of issues related to those relationships between web reports, their data sources, constants, and how they're linked to other web reports. Again, a lot of these, we make it really easy to jump from this table of issues and go in to make those changes. This gives you a bit more detail. But then we also have another type of audit, which is extremely useful. User group recursion audit. And this is a very common thing where, so less about this application in particular, this is looking at the content server users and groups and finding scenarios in which there's recursion in groups. So a group being part of another group, and then that higher level group being referenced again. So this can create a lot of havoc when you're trying to cascade down changes to permissions, and it can have a whole slew of onset of effects. So this is another type of audit where we are basically just identifying gotchas in the system that you should tighten up to avoid surprises down the road. So once we go through and clean up these errors, run the audit, and we get kind of the thumbs up to go, we have confidence now that our application is going to install well, and it's going to be robust as possible for like future upgrades to content server and so on. One other thing we want to do here is we want to see, as we roll out the application, we want to make sure that the application is actually being effective to the end user. So are they using the application? Are they using it properly? And at the end of the day, our issue tracking system, is it actually making a difference to the organization by capturing issues and closing them out? So one of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to create a web report that has a summary that we want to see in everybody's email every day of the most critical issues. So this will be just a friendly reminder to everybody who is involved with the tracking of these issues. This will keep the most critical ones kind of front of mind for them. So we have a web report that, when you run it, it'll give a summary of the most critical issues. And what we're going to do is, if we inspect this web report, we'll see that it has a destination setup of email. So we know the email address that it's going to be sent to is going to be admin. We would then, we can put user groups as part of this definition. So we don't necessarily have to put in everybody's email address. We can specify a group. And this web report will run on a schedule daily. So one of the other products that we've created that is going to be just a huge boost in performance of your system overall is the Ravenblack multi-agent scheduler. So we've created a web report. We've defined a schedule for it to run every day. But if we take a look at this system and all the web reports that have schedules on the system, we're going to find that this system has a lot of schedules defined. So the multi-agent scheduler gives you not only a view of all the different schedules that have been defined and all the details about them, we also make it easy to kind of modify them. But um, before I kind of jump into kind of the really exciting bit, um, let's take a look here, and we're going to look for our schedule. So as we go down, where is it? Daily report, critical issues. You can see here, this is a schedule that I've made. So one of the key things to remember with web report schedules is that anybody in the system with access to that web report with the right permissions can create their own schedules. So it's not that we just have a one-to-one schedule with every web report. Each web report in the system could potentially have multiple and many schedules defined for it based on all the different users using that web report. So just to kind of set up and queue up, you can immediately start to see a lot of the problems that are going to be coming our way. So one is just managing all of the different types of schedules and making sense of them as an administrator is a heavy task. But also, if we look at all these web reports running on a schedule, some of these web reports are critical business processes, and we don't necessarily want our scheduled report to slow down other critical processes that have been defined. So the multi-agent scheduler, first and foremost, allows us to create multiple scheduling agents. So we have our default agent, of course, but instead of having each of these web reports and their schedules fighting for the agent, web reports can take a long time to run. They can be on really tight schedules where it's every 5 minutes, every minute, or so on. We don't have all these web reports fighting for attention. So, for example, all of our business critical approval schedules, they have their own agent. So we know that the web report schedule agent approvals, all of our critical business processes related to approvals, they are running on their own agent. So anything that we create, as long as we create it on a different agent, these ones will be left undisturbed. So what we've done is we've created a new agent, which is as simple to do as just adding an agent here and then saving it. So when we select this agent, there's no web reports schedules highlighted because none are assigned to this agent. So assigning our schedule here is as simple as just double clicking the row. And now this web report agent will run, or this schedule agent will run on its own, and just our daily report is going to be running on this. This is also really useful for if you're trying to troubleshoot schedules. What you can do is put those schedules that you're trying to troubleshoot on their own thread just to make sure you're not disrupting any other schedules running on the system and making sure that your critical processes aren't disturbed while you're making changes, implementing new schedules, or troubleshooting those. Okay, very quickly, we're going to jump back into our application analyzer. And one final thing I wanted to mention before passing back to Greg is that we have built the application analyzer with extensibility in mind. So, for example, we've talked about this inspection menu, or sorry, the aspect menu. There's a couple sections down here that we've created. So for us, especially as developers, it's quite often to be developing something and getting errors, SDNRs, and getting trace logs. So for our purposes, we've created our own aspect looking specifically at trace logs. So very quickly and easily, we can create a new aspect for our application analyzer that's relevant to us and our, the work that we do. And in this case, this aspect is looking at trace logs in the system, grouping them by date, and then making it really easy to look at the actual trace log information without having to leave this UI, but also not have to access, leave content server and go into the file server and so on. So this is something as part of the application framework that we've created makes it really easy to extend this application and make it your own and make sure that you have the specific tools unique to you in this toolbox as well. Greg, 1157, there's two more things we want to talk about, packaging and deployment. Do we want to mention those, or do you want to share your screen?
I'll just mention them. We won't share a
Sure.
screen, but the you've noticed that the CS apps, which is built into Content Server, we've built a lot of features around that. You don't have to use CS apps, but if you do, we have things like GitHub export, import, which you can use. We've also built the ability to upload CS apps, or for that matter, subtags from your browser, and to set them up on a system without needing access to the server. So some of that's what supports our cloud stuff. And the downloading and uploading, all that type of thing in terms of packaging is something we've put quite a lot into that we can't really get into within this session. But we'd happy to speak to you about any questions about any of that, or things that you wonder if the analyzer can do. And I think we can bring this to a close.
Yeah, an hour goes by really quickly. So very quick. So on the screen, very easy to get in contact with us. Those are the three main ways: email, phone, and web address. But of course, like, please send us any questions, any thoughts. We're here to help. If you see something you like, we're happy to show more. And yeah, so yeah, on behalf of Greg and Sheila and myself, just want to thank you again for watching this. And yeah, we hope you have a great day.